Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Working People, a podcast about the lives, jobs, dreams, and struggles of the working class today. Brought to you in partnership with In These Times magazine and the Real News Network, produced by Jules Taylor, and made possible by the support of listeners like you. Working People is a proud member of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, so if you're hungry for more worker and labor-focused shows like ours, follow the link in the show notes and go check out the other great shows in our network. And please do support the work that we are doing here at Working People so we can keep growing and keep bringing y'all more important conversations every single week. You can write a positive review of the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, which really helps us out. You can also share these episodes on your social media and share them with your coworkers, your friends, and your family members. And of course, the single best thing you can do to support our work is become a paid monthly subscriber on Patreon for just $5 a month. Subscribe for $10 a month, and you will also get a print subscription to the amazing In These Times magazine. Just head on over to patreon.com/workingpeople. That's patreon.com/workingpeople. Hit the subscribe button, and you will immediately unlock all of the amazing bonus episodes that we publish every month and all the bonus episodes that we put out for our patrons over the past 6 seasons of the show. My name is Maximilian Alvarez, and we've got a really special, really important international episode for y'all today. I want to jump straight into our episode today, which I am incredibly proud and excited to share with y'all. I got a really special opportunity to talk to folks in Brazil about the slave-like conditions that many farm workers have been subjected to there, and about a truly radical new government program that is trying to break the cycle of enslavement and exploitation. As Vitor Filgueiras, professor of economics at the Federal University of Bahia, wrote in a December 2020 article that we've linked to in the show notes of this episode, quote, "Between 1995 and mid-2020, more than 55,000 workers were removed from conditions analogous to slavery by the Brazilian state, without any indication that there has been a reduction in this type of criminal exploitation of labor in the country. On the contrary, many workers are repeated victims of extreme exploitation," end quote. Now, as I discuss with Vitor himself in the second half of this episode, there have been numerous efforts to liberate farm workers from these slave-like conditions. But I mean, if workers don't have other means or opportunities to economically sustain themselves, then they are obviously at high risk of falling right back into this exploitative system just to make ends meet for themselves and their families. And that is exactly why the project Life After Rescue was created in 2017 through a partnership between the Federal University of Bahia's Faculty of Economics and the Federal Labor Prosecution Office for the 23rd region in Brazil. And so Vitor continues in this article, quote, "To sustainably combat slave labor and allow survivors and their families the ability to resist exploitation, the Life After Rescue project seeks to facilitate self-sufficient rural production. This production should be implemented preferably in survivors' places of origin. The acquisition of land, as well as purchase of other necessary tools for production and distribution, can be carried out using funds from public civil proceedings or from the terms of conduct adjustment pertaining to lawsuits or extrajudicial procedures related to inspection activities carried out by the Federal Labor Prosecution Office and the Secretariat of Labor Inspection," end quote. Now, your eyes may have glossed over on that last part, but I want to just take a second to underline it in bold red pen because it's really important and actually really radical what this program is proposing to do. And what this program is designed to do is actually take the fines that employers are forced to pay when they break the law, when they violate workers' rights, when they entrap workers in these slave-like conditions and they get fined for it, they get taken to court. So this program is taking that money and using it to buy land, tools, seed, and other necessities for the liberated farm workers to own and operate themselves and to develop that land into self-sufficient farms. I mean, that is one hell of a program. And if it is successful, I mean, just imagine what this kind of approach to labor and land policy could look like here in the US or in other parts of the world. So again, in the second half of this episode, you'll hear my one-on-one conversation with Vitor Filgueiras about where this policy came from and what it will take to actually make it work and why it's so important that it works. And in the first half of the episode, you'll hear my conversation with Marcos and John, two farm workers who were rescued from slave-like conditions themselves and are now among the Life After Rescue program's first participants. I got to record that interview with Marcos and John from across the hemisphere, and we were able to do it, thankfully, because Vitor was there with them, sitting in this remote community center in rural Bahia, using his computer so we could talk and translating between English and Portuguese for us. Now, the audio from that first segment isn't great, so I really apologize for that, but I am sure that you'll all agree that the very fact that we were able to do this interview at all with Marcos and John, and after everything that they've been through, is pretty incredible. So without further ado, without any more from me, here are my conversations with Marcos, John, and Vitor about the radical and necessary fight in Brazil to liberate workers from slave-like conditions and to return the land and the means of production to the people. I got work to do. Well, Marcos, John, thank you both so much for joining us today on the podcast. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you too for the opportunity.
Well, it's really an honor to get to talk to you guys from so far across the world, and I know that our listeners really want to hear more about you and what you're going through down there in Brazil. So I wanted to just start by asking if you could introduce yourselves to the listeners here in North America. Tell us about your life. Tell us where you came from, and tell us, more about the kind of work that you've been doing.
Bom dia, em primeiro lugar. He's saying good morning to the game, and he has also said that he's really happy to be talking to you as well.
Eu sou da Bahia aqui mesmo, em Santa Coité.
He is from Bahia, state of Bahia. The name of the city is Conceição do Coité, northeast of Brazil.
Eu trabalhava aqui mesmo, na região, aqui com uma empresa de bebida aqui.
He used to work here in the region. He used to work in a warehouse, packing and dispatching bottles of drinks, different drinks. And then at some point, he was called to go to Rio Grande do Sul. It's a state in Brazil's south, the most southern states of Brazil. And he went there.
E criaram trabalhando de fazenda, da zona rural, também criação, a minha área é na cultura.
John is also from here. He's also from Conceição do Coité, Bahia. And as Marcos, he was grown up in the rural area, and he has always worked in the rural area uh, gathering and working with animals such as goats.
Can I ask if you guys could say a little more about what life is like in these rural areas in Brazil? Like when you're born there and you grow up, how do you make a living and what are the economic prospects like for people like you?
Assim, é tranquilo, né? Ultimamente meio aqui na sobreviver, ferrando os trabalhos aqui, bicos, né?
He is saying that it's normally peaceful life, and he works on a daily basis in casual jobs. For example, nowadays he's working helping truck drivers going around the cities, on the northeast of Brazil.
Não tem 100% lá, hein? Ou corre atrás, ou não desse, né?
You say that things are a little tough regarding the economic life because there are very few opportunities to work. And normally, when you find something, it's like casual jobs, or working on a daily basis on place, then the other place, there isn't many corporations, or the economic life here is hard.
Esse tempo a humanidade é muito boa para que tenha melhoria. E aqui,
Jonas said that what Marcus said, that's what happens. Indeed, it's very hard to have opportunities here, and the life here is normally tough.
a gente sobrevive aqui, mas a maioria aqui, o sal é produto muito importante aqui na região. E a gente tem sobrevive aqui, isso aqui.
There is a main rural production here, a main product. It's a root from Brazil that's used for different purposes. It's called sisal. I can translate it using Google here just in a second. And but the production of sisal does not guarantee good living conditions. Quite the opposite. And also, it's a very dangerous working process because they use old and unsafe machines to process this root called sisal.
I want to talk about the conditions on the farms in a second, but I also wanted to pause really quick and ask if you guys could say a little bit about life outside of work, where you come from, because, on this show, we try to really remind people that workers are not just the jobs we do. We're human beings with families. So I wanted to just ask what you do, where you find joy, and where you find meaning in life outside of work in these conditions.
Eu bato uma bolinha, pego minhas crianças, meus filhos, levo pro jardim, estou batendo uma bolinha junto, nos horários vagos. Quando eu tenho que fazer, de casa jogando videogame com eles.
He really likes to play soccer with his kids in the rest time, or otherwise they like to play video games at home as well.
Isso aí, na semana a gente procura interar, é mesmo bastante, né? É do trabalho, o grande da vida, de história, participando do passeio e tomar boa, jogar bola e também tomar uma banho de praia é bom, esse quadro, a família.
He is saying that during the weekends, he really likes to go for a swim, the river, and to drink a beer as well.
Simón. Yo también. And I want let's talk about the situation that rural workers are enduring on these farms.
right? Because that's why we're really here, because I think the world needs to understand the slave-like conditions that you and others have had to endure. So can you just explain for people who didn't know that this was happening, like what the state of things is for farm workers in rural Brazil right now?
Lá foi assim, eu estava aqui na Bahia e fui convidado.
He was here in Bahia, northeast of Brazil, and he was invited to go to a farm, a great farm in Rio Grande do Sul, South Brazil.
Me contaram uma história aqui, quando eu cheguei lá foi totalmente diferente.
When he was invited, they told him a story saying that he would have good conditions and so on, but when he got there, it was completely different.
Sem jeito nenhum, sem bom alojamento, prometer tudo que tinha isso lá, não teve nada de certo.
They said that they would have good accommodation and everything would be nice, but the place that they had to stay was terrible in all aspects, dirty.
E fomos torturados. É ruim que sujo, ou o chão ele era sujo, não tinha higiene nenhum. Lá o banheiro era tudo aberto, o lugar que a gente almoçava, se alimentava, era tudo numa área só.
The places that they had to go as a bathroom wasn't discriminated from the other areas. So everything was pretty much at the same place, the place that they had to rest, the place that they had to eat, to go to bathroom. Everything was pretty much just one area.
Muita 220.
220 people at the same place.
E aí prometeram pra gente um horário, quando a gente chegou lá, nós não tínhamos meta marcada, era de domingo a domingo trabalho.
They told them that they would have like a normal schedule, days of time to work, time to rest, days off and so on. But they got there, they had to work all day long from Sunday to Sunday.
Acordava a gente 4 horas da manhã, quando era 4 da manhã, que pegasse uma rapida, 5 horas no carro, eu estava esperando.
They had to wake up 4 a.m. every morning, and they had to leave to start working at 4:30 a.m. every morning.
Trabalhava de 5 horas da manhã até 10 horas da noite.
They were obligated to work from 5 a.m. up to 10 p.m. every day.
Era assim, tinha uma boa alimentação dele, convertido totalmente ao coisa, quando nós chegamos lá, tudo diferente. Disse que a gente tinha um domingo de folga, quando a gente chegou, eles falaram que tinha direito a folga nenhuma lá, era só trabalho mesmo.
They were told that they would have, would be able to rest every Sunday, but then they had to work every day without rest. The food was terrible, was disgusting.
Meus colegas lá foram agredidos mesmo, membros quebrados.
Many colleagues of him were beaten out. Some of them had broken arms, their arms broken.
E aí nós, alguma coisa, alguma coisa, que um médico lá tinha um atestado, de botar ele atestado, sem viação.
Even when they had some working-related accidents or any kind of injury, they were forced to work, otherwise they would get beaten.
É isso aí, é o que dá para falar comigo também. E a situação é essa aí.
Everything that Marcos has said is true. They were together there. So he experienced the same thing.
A gente, o alojamento não tinha suficiente, e mais era bem o valor desse.
There was no privacy in the accommodation. They were all living at the same place. All 220 workers were living at the same place. Everything was dirty. They didn't have privacy even to take a shower or to make their physical necessities.
Eles mesmo faziam uma comida lá. Uma macarrão seguia uma cliente que tem. Uma farinha lá com os carros que não tinha mal também. E um arroz lá parecendo umas pedras, umas fritas.
The food was terrible. They were served like rice in very bad conditions. And it was exactly the opposite of what was promised for them.
E aí nós comemos uma coisinha diferente, toda para esteja daqui, nós mudar, fazer dar dinheiro e mudar. Essa é lá, mexer.
They could only have something different when some of their relatives would send some money so that they can escape for a while from this accommodation, this place that they were held on, and buy something different. Otherwise, they had to eat this terrible.
Trabalhar no dia que era China, tinha que trabalhar China.
They would have to work. They would be forced to work in every conditions, even if the weather was terrible, if it was rainy. We're talking about the south of Brazil, so the weather is very different from here. It rains a lot, and it's much colder than here.
E aí nós tínhamos que fazer um serviço. Se adoecesse, não podia botar 2 dias de atestado, tinha que ser um dia só. Se chegasse lá com o papel de 2 dias de atestado, eles rasgavam. E aí dava punição na gente batendo.
If one of them tried to use some kind of medical notes, medical recipe, saying that they would need to stay at the accommodation instead of go to work, they would be beaten down. So they would be forced to work, even if they were able to, or if they managed to meet a doctor, a public doctor. In Brazil, you have this public system, free public system. If they were able to attend the appointment and get a note from the doctor saying that they had to stay and get healed, they would be beaten down.
My God, this is horrifying to hear. And I'm so heartbroken because I have heard similar stories, even here in the United States, where you have Guatemalans, Mexicans, migrants from Central America who are living like slaves at the farms where our tomatoes come from. Can I ask, just for people who are listening to get a clearer picture here, can I ask if you guys could say a little more about the kind of people who end up working at these farms and who owns these farms? Who are the people who are beating and exploiting you?
They are almost all of them are from Bahia, from this region here. This city and other cities here, Conceição do Coité. It's called Região Cisaleira because it's linked to these products that I was talking about, sisal, these roots, and pretty much all of them, the 220 people are from around here.
Aurora, Saltão, a Fênix, Aurora, Saltão, a Fênix.
They are saying that the farms are from big, actually huge national wine brands. Aurora, Saltão, and he is forgetting about the other one. But we're talking about huge players here in Brazil in terms of wine. They were working on the grape. Just to understand, they are the main brands, and they are also talking about the intermediaries, this contracting, the middle guys, Santana Oliveira, and so on, examples. So the thing is, there are 3 main brands there, corporations, that they produce the grape and they make the wine. And they were hired through intermediaries. And they were talking about the name of the intermediaries. And so they were there working on the lodging, the dispatching of the box of grapes. Estão preparando o carregamento, descarregamento dos carregamentos, os caminhões, descarregamento. Also in the gathering of the grapes and loading the trucks and unloading the box with the grapes.
Nós tirava a rua, carregava os caminhões e nós soltamos carros.
They would pick the grapes, then put the grapes in boxes, then load the trucks, and then unload it the place that was supposed to go to make the ones.
Well, can I ask a little more about that? Because, on this show, we talk to workers about the work that they do and the labor that goes into that. Could I ask if you could just talk a little bit more about what a typical day on one of these farms looks like And how much do you get paid for that?
Assim, lá eu não tinha horário de parar, não. Só tinha horário para começar. Eu tinha que estar lá no bloco ao vivo 4 horas, 4h30 da manhã.
You'd have to go to the place to start working at 4:30, and they would have a specific time to stop. They would go, like you said, even up to 10 p.m.
Fez um contrato para a gente de 60 dias, 2 meses. Quando chegou lá, falou que em mês, nós ia trabalhar para o primeiro mês. Mas quando veio o primeiro mês, ele falou, qual que é dinheiro para receber? Só depois pegar essa colheita.
When they got there, they signed a contract saying that they would be paid once a month. But after the first month, they said that they'd only be paid when the service would be finished. They would just be paid after picking up all the rape that they were supposed to do, after the season.
Quando chegava lá, tinha que cortar as uvas, colocar nas caixinhas, transferir para outras caixas maiores, carregar um tal do tuk-tuk, que era o que puxava as uvas. E a gente ficava mais 10 pés, então
So they are saying that the working days were very similar. They would start working at 5 a.m. So they would start working on picking up the grapes. Then they would fill the boxes, then load the box, put everything inside the trucks, then go on the trucks to the wine factories and load the box there. And then starts the process all over again. So their daily, on a daily basis, the working day was doing this from 5 a.m. up even to 10 p.m.
What kind of toll does that take on your body doing that kind of work day after day? Does your back hurt? Do your knees hurt? Are you getting sunburned? Or I just wanted to ask a little more what doing that work does to you as a person.
All the body is saying that everything hurts. Everything hurts.
Tornar nossos aparelhos, deixar a gente em ligação com a família.
He is saying that also they would take their mobiles, it's their cell phones from them, and wouldn't allow them to talk to their families back home.
Mas só mais extremamente minhas costas, já se mostra, não ajoelhei, sentado, para ir o dia todo.
They couldn't sit. They would have to stay up all day. So the back hurts a lot, also the knees. But like he said, he was very stressed here that all their bodies would hurt.
O dia todinho com o negócio de 30 quilos, 25 no pescoço. Parado a gente tirar o business de volta. Nós é né?
They are saying that this box that I was talking about, that they were talking about, it would be like 70 pound. They would weigh kind of 70 pounds in terms of, because you're saying kilos, in Brazil you say kilos. 30 kilos is like a 70 pound box. So it would hurt a lot. It hurts a lot. They would feel a lot of pain on their backs, also on their necks. It hurts a lot.
Joelho, pé, tornozelo, meu, chegar aqui, eu tava tudo inchado. Tem que fazer mais nada. Tem que deitar pra dormir e pular no outro dia, meus horários. 4 horas da manhã, 4h30, pegar a orientação. E 5 horas da manhã, tem que estar na barreira lá, eles xingam, fazer o seguinte.
They say that they worked like machines because everything was hurting. Their ankles also was hurting a lot, were hurt, and they would just get at the accommodation place and kind of taking a nap, and then 4 a.m. the other day, wake up and start all over again.
Man, I'm so sorry that you guys have gone through this, and you know, we're everyone listening to this, I know, is sending you nothing but love and solidarity, and we are furious that our fellow workers in Brazil are being treated like this. I want to talk about the efforts to rescue farm workers living in slave-like conditions in Brazil, because I know there have been a number of efforts from the government to try to address this situation. And now there's a new effort, right? That's more radical, and that is going to try to address where the previous attempts have failed. So can you tell us a little more about these past and current attempts to rescue workers from these slave-like conditions in Brazil?
So in Brazil, over the last 3 decades, actually, there's been a public policy carried out by a group of institutions, of public institutions, such as the Ministry of Labor, the Federal Policy, and so on, that they investigate and they go around the country looking and trying to catch people being treated like slaves, people forced to work in slave-like conditions. And this public policy has faced many challenges, but it's pretty stable in terms of working. So we have to admit that this public policy that tackles slave-like conditions is successful at some points. It's in terms of reaching people, catching the situations, and rescuing people from slave-like conditions. The thing is that those people, those workers that are rescued, they haven't been rated, they haven't been addressed in terms of what to do afterwards. So they are rescued. What's really important, it's something that otherwise they keep there, keep being treated like that. And they normally are from different parts of the country, so they go back home. The employer, the corporation is obligated, they had to pay for them to go back. The workers normally gets their payments, everything that the company has to pay, they are obligated to pay. But of course, it's a temporary solution, and there hasn't been any public policy consistent one that can deliver something for them in terms of going on, in a sustainable perspective, in a sustainable point of view. So I was rescued. That's very important. And what now? What I'm gonna do with my life? And what the Brazilian government is trying to do now is a new public policy, precisely trying to give alternatives, sustainable alternatives for those workers.
I think that's a great context, because I think that makes sense, right? That if you can still rescue people from these slave conditions, but they don't have another job that can sustain them, they might fall right back into another company that treats them like this. And so for people listening, this new program is attempting to go a step further and help provide not only to liberate workers from these conditions, but to then provide them with economic support so that they can live their lives, they can sustain themselves. And so, Vitor, I wanted to ask if you could ask these guys to say a little bit about what it was like to be able to leave these terrible farms, leave those slave-like conditions, and where things stand now. What do they hope to get out of this program? What is going to need to happen so that these guys can live their lives?
Just to add on the context, like if it helps, there are data that shows that many of the workers that were rescued, they are rescued more than once, precisely because there isn't a public policy, a stable public policy to offer them something that's sustainable, some alternative. And what you are trying to do now, talking as part of the program, is precisely to give the means of production for those workers in a way that they won't rely on the function of the labor markets. In other ways, other terms, as any capitalist societies, if you don't have the need of production, you have to sell your workforce. And when there is no jobs, the person, even if they are qualified for some job, if the job is not there, they will start to death. So the main issue, the main goal of this program is to give the means of production for those workers. They can live by themselves without relying on the labor markets. Da saída, da retirada do gostaria que teve igual. There wasn't anything like that.
Eu agradeci a Deus.
We just started to thank God.
O pessoal do Pós Resgate na Federal me encheu às 2 horas da noite e eu achei me esperar.
This working group that I was talking about, the Federal Police, the Ministry of Labor, the Labor Inspections, they got there at the accommodation place at 2 a.m. and liberated them, rescued them, and he was so relieved.
It's an issue. Maria, estou bom, agradeci a Deus. E agora vai estar, eu chego que viesse a gente.
It was a huge relief for them when the labor inspectors came and the federal police came and told them that that situation was terrible and they wouldn't allow them to keep staying there in that conditions. They were very happy, very relieved. They were thanking God.
E ele ligou por segurança, mandou pegar a gente não lá embaixo, para ninguém não deitar, sentar. E os colegas fugiram, a polícia estava na frente. Ele perguntou para eles.
When this working group, the federal police, the Ministry of Labor, the labor inspectors got there, the security guards of the company told them, all of them, to go to the basements, to hide, so that the working group, the governments, wouldn't see them. But one of them was able to leave the place, and this only worker told them that all the others were inside.
Aí ela achou todo mundo lá, hein? Abriu os portões, a gente começou a sair para fora.
It was just one guy. The guy was able to leave the place, and they told the federal police and the inspector that everyone was in there. And because of this guy, a working group went there and found all the workers on the basement, in the basement.
Alguém falou que achou abismado, mas tinha tanto de peão nem dentro da se ninguém sabe.
Even the police guys were terrified with the situation that they had just found.
O único privado é quase a situação.
The situation was indeed completely terrible.
Do jeito que ele voltou a gente para sair lá do Rio Grande do Sul e exportar para o Federal.
The federal police had to bodyguard them from Rio Grande do Sul up to Bahia, talking about a 2,000 miles trip.
Ele desde São Paulo, a Federal, escoltando a gente. Lá de São Paulo, não podia vir embora aqui. Lá para cá já fazer nada para ele, não tinha vir lá para cá.
So they came in an airplane from Rio Grande do Sul to São Paulo, bodyguarded by the federal police. Then the federal police arranged a bus to take them from São Paulo up to Bahia.
So where do things stand now? What happens now? What?
A gente está esperando aí, mas agora em nome de gente que abriu a teoria para a gente que estava acontecendo para a gente aí, né? Então nós estamos aguardando. Para não ter que sair mais para fora, trabalhar para os caras desse aí.
He is just expecting that with this project, he won't have to leave the city anymore, to working for bad guys like these ones.
A expectativa é essa, a gente ligando com essa associação muito grande aqui, e que venha vários projetos para a gente, precisa mais sair desse lugar, e dar para nossos familiares. Eu lembrei da associação aqui, projeto, ou...
He is saying that now that they have just founded the association, they are very keen to be able to work by themselves without employers, without anyone telling them what to do. And hopefully, with some support from the government in terms of educating them, giving them the tools, they'll be able to live freely by themselves in a nice way, a good life.
Nós estamos aí com um projeto esperando acontecer aí, Deus vai ajudar a correr tudo bem, a gente vai agora para a mitigação. para não ter que estar aí, ou eu conseguir para um lugar desse e trabalhar fora, deixa nos problemas desse mesmo aí, ó.
He's stressing once again that he is expecting to have a good life and have income enough that he doesn't have need to live once again. And with this association, they are seeking and looking forward to create goods to produce milk and meat.
E também a proposta diferença do novo aqui é que a associação é produzir criação para porte, família, entendeu? Igreja, para os que seria o good, né?
They are saying that they are looking forward to start working. Right now, they are looking for a farm, a place that the program can buy for the association. And when this place is arranged for the association, they are looking forward to create the goats, and not only for the milk and for the meats, but also to produce cheese and yogurt. They're looking forward to do this. They really like yogurt, cheese, goat cheese and yogurt.
Trabalhar com os colegas aqui sem ninguém poder mandar ninguém, cada um está na sua meta.
Working together without anyone telling the other what to do, in a democratic way, without having a boss. That's something that he's really looking forward as well.
É isso aí, só agradeço mesmo. Agradecer, estamos juntos, a parceria e vai dar tudo certo.
They are saying that they are very thankful for the program, expecting to start as soon as possible, and thanking you, Max, as well for the opportunity. It's really nice talking to you.
Brothers, the pleasure was really all mine. And I just wanted to say again that all of us here in the United States are with you, and we hope that you get that good life that you deserve.
He is saying that the same to you guys, and he is really happy talking to you. And like we say in Brazil, we always say it says slang, but it's like you're together. That's what I say, together.
Perfect. That was a great spot to end on, guys.
Hello, my name is Vitor Filgueiras, and I used to be a labor inspector from the Ministry of Labor in Brazil. Now I'm a professor at the Federal University of Bahia. I'm a professor of economics. And currently, I'm working on some projects, and one of them is called Vida Pós Resgate, or in English, it would be like Life After the Rescue.
Hell yeah. Well, Vitor, thanks again so much for joining me, brother, from across the hemisphere. Really, really appreciate it. And, listeners just heard the conversation that we recorded, with these two incredible guys that you're working with who are part of this, really revolutionary program that we're here talking about today. And I wanted to just make sure before we ended this episode that we gave listeners a chance to sort of hear a little more about the deeper context here, and know what they need to know about what makes this current program so different. What challenges lie ahead, and where the program itself came from. And you're the perfect guy to talk to about this. So I really appreciate you hopping back on another recording with me. And I wanted to just sort of start there. We talked a little bit about this in the previous conversation that listeners just heard, but I was wondering if you could say a little more about the background here, right? Because this is not a new problem, workers getting trapped in slave-like conditions And there have been multiple attempts by the state government to try to address that problem. I was wondering if you could just fill in for listeners here in North America, like some of that history. Like, tell us about how bad this problem is, how widespread it is, and what attempts have been made in the past to address the scourge of workers being trapped in slave-like conditions in Brazil.
Sure. So the first thing that we have to keep in mind is that this problem, which means very, very bad conditions for workers, very harsh conditions, like similar to slavery or close to slavery, it's not an issue that's particular from Brazil. Any capitalist societies can face and may face this issue if there is no regulation, or if the protective regulation is weak. I'm talking about labor law, I'm talking about labor movements, and so on. Because of the disparity between labor and capital, if there is no protective regulation, very bad situations can be seen and tend to be registered in the workers' lives. That's one main thing that I need to stress. So it's a potential situation for any capitalist society. Having that said, in Brazil particularly, we have this terrible background of slavery, like state-based slavery. Our capitalism was based on slavery for over 3 centuries. So because of that, we have a culture of exploitation that's maybe even deeper in other countries. But look, it's not only the rural areas. This program is focusing the rural areas, but it's a widespread problem. Like I said, if there is no protective regulation from the states, or if the labor movement is not strong enough, capital can do whatever it will. And it's not about manichaeism, it's not about being bad or being good. It's just part of the process of seeking profits. There's a reason in itself. But anyhow, like I said, in Brazil, we had this very traditional, weak protective regulation by the states, and very bad situations, which we call slave-like conditions, are spread. That it's very hard to estimate, how many people are being submitted to this kind of exploitative situation. But what I want to say is that for the last 3 decades, almost 3 decades, there is a state-based group that is supposed to tackle the problem, making inspections in the fields, in the corporations, also taking the case to the criminal courts, to the labor courts, trying to make this kind of practice, limiting people to slave-like conditions, something not attractive to the corporations. And this group and this state-based public policy of trying to impose fines, eventually taking employers to jail, have faced challenge, but also have been doing some important work in terms of regulating the demand of labor force, regulating the employer, But there isn't, or there wasn't, any kind of program to give alternatives to workers. That's the main point here. Workers have been rescued from slave-like conditions at least since the 90s, the beginning of the 90s, 1990s in Brazil. But after the rescue, in other words, after getting released from the slave-like conditions, there wasn't a program to address the problem in terms of, so you are free now, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with your life?
Mm-hmm.
So Vida Pós Resgate, this program that we are carrying out here, is exactly trying to address this problem of the alternative for workers that have faced slave-like conditions and need to have an alternative for their lives.
Well, and like this is such an important development that I think, countries around the world can learn from, especially the United States, right? Because the progression here is, like you said, over 3 decades, there have been efforts by the state to intervene in this terrible problem of workers being trapped in slave-like conditions. And so the first step is to liberate people who are trapped in that situation, which has happened, right? Like you said, a lot of people have been rescued. We talked to those guys in the previous conversation about how they were rescued, and it was a terrifying story. So that's the first step, and that's an important step, of course. But then, like you said, if workers don't have another option to make a living after that, a lot of them are going to get trapped again in a similar situation. And so I know that one of the steps that was taken after that was to try to, give workers some like professional training, right? And try to kind of help them, improve their stock on the labor market. And then that didn't work. That wasn't sufficient enough either, right? Because, and this is why the program that we're here to talk about today is so, I think, vital and revolutionary, because then the next step was, okay, we need to provide material resources for these workers who have been liberated from slave-like conditions so that they can build their own self-sustaining farm. They can live and work off the land. And in fact, we're going to take the fines from the employers who are trapping these workers. We're going to take the money that we're taking from them and give it back to the workers. Like, that's incredible. Do I have that right? Is that the progression here?
Yeah, Max, perfect. So during like the last 15 years, there were some attempts, and they were like, there were people that honestly were trying to address the post-rescue problem. In other words, what should we do to help people that were rescued? And these attempts were linked to the so-called qualification of the workers. So if we qualify them, if they are, we get some training, they can go back to the labor market and everything is going to be all right. And it's not, once again, it's not a specific situation in Brazil. It's a neoliberal approach to the problem. All over the world, there is this ideological concept that if you train the workers, they will get jobs on the labor markets. Like,
there's a great, sorry to interrupt, but there's a really funny, I mean, it's really annoying and it pisses me off, but it's almost become a joke here in the United States, because one of the areas where we see this happen is in the parts of the country that used to employ a lot of people in the coal mining industry. And so obviously, as the world transitions away from coal energy, a lot of these areas in like Kentucky, West Virginia, they don't have those jobs anymore for people. And so it's been a question for decades of like, what do we do with the people who are living here. And the neoliberal response is like, oh, why don't we train these 50-year-old coal miners to code on their computers so that they can get different jobs? And it's like, that's a nice idea, but that's going to work for like 5 people. That's not a systemic solution to the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And it lies on a theoretical points of view. That's the new classical economy. It's not something new. It's something very old. That suppose that if workers are trained enough, the jobs will appear. So it's all on the workers. That's the main issue. It's like if the supply of labor force, the workers themselves are prepared, they will find some job. And of course, it's at least naive because there is a social monopoly from the capital to decide if the job will exist or not. If there is no investment, the investment creates the jobs. If there is no investment by the companies or by the states, there is no job, no matter how qualified, how trained the person is. So in this case, in Brazil, there were some attempts, like I said, in some states. It wasn't something very, very wide, very comprehensive. It was specific states, and they made some trainings and so on. And we made a research, actually, Max. We made a research here at the Federal University of Bahia to see how it's works. And when the labor markets was in a good situation, like when the economy was growing, people that were trained were getting jobs, and people that weren't trained were getting jobs as well. And when the crisis began in 2015, everybody was unemployed. Both people that weren't trained, people that were trained. So something very expected. I want to stress that some people that were involved had good motives. They were honestly trying to do something. It's important to train workers. Of course, it's important, but it's not the main issue that will create the jobs. And it has been an ideological tool in the hands of corporations and neoliberal ideologues all over the world. So anyway, just to try to be more direct here, considering also these attempts here to try to solve the problems from the what are these people gonna do now after the rescue, and we saw that it wasn't working. We developed this idea that you pretty much perfectly already presented. So the idea is very simple. It's to say, look, why are these people facing so bad conditions? It's simple, because they don't have the means of production to carry on with their lives, to have the decent amounts of material sources to live. Because they don't have the means of production, that they have to sell their labor force on the labor markets. And the labor market, by definition, is who has more power, who has the power inside the market. By definition, are the corporations. In other words, if you send back people to the labor markets, even if they get a job, they can face once again very harsh situations, even slave-like conditions, if the labor market is not well regulated. If you give them an opportunity to work by themselves, to all the means of production, to organize themselves in a democratic way. In other words, without bosses, and employees, without in hierarchy between people, maybe they won't need to go to the labor markets anymore. So the main point of this project, this program, is to take people out of the labor markets, is to give the opportunity for them to organize themselves and to produce in a democratic way and to emancipate themselves from the labor market. So what we do is very simple. In theory, it's very simple. Of course, it's very complex to implement, but it's to get the fines that it's companies themselves, corporations pay for labor courts, when they are sued, they have to pay fines, and we reverse these fines for associations, rural associations, to produce healthy food in the original places that the workers come from. Most of the workers rescued here in Brazil, they go from one place to another. They have some kind of local migration, They normally, not only, but normally they go from the northeast of Brazil to the south of Brazil. So the idea is to get this money from the fines that corporations themselves have to pay, and to give not to the workers directly, but to arrange, to facilitate, to help them to build in the cities that they belong from, associations, rural associations, to produce healthy foods, and from now on, we have dozens of different variables to organize and to make it work. But the main point is exactly what you said, is to let the workers have the means of production, let the workers organize themselves in a democratic way to produce specifically healthy foods. And I can also explain why the idea is to produce healthy food.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little more. And I want to ask about how you got involved in all of this, and what it's been like for you to see this kind of program come into existence, because it's such it is a radical program, and it does say something about a different approach to the question of governance, right? Like, what is a state supposed to do? How is it supposed to serve the people? Like we were saying, I think that we've been, in our respective countries, we've been dominated by this neoliberal bullshit for so long that we've forgotten that there are other ways to organize society. There are other ways that the state can serve the people. And what is happening over there, it reminds me of things in the 20th century, like the New Deal here in the United States, or Lázaro Cárdenas in Mexico, like land reforms and expropriating the the oil industry in the 1930s. Like that was radical stuff. But it's like you guys are kind of hearkening back to that, and so I wanted to ask, like a little more about how you got involved in all of this, and what this program says about the kind of current approach to government in Brazil, and how, what do you think other countries can learn from that?
Yes, it makes so it's a common sense in Brazil. It's one of our main historical problems for our societies, is precisely because Brazil has never faced a land reform or an agrarian reform. If it's more specific, I don't know. How normally you say it in the US, it's land reform or agrarian reform?
It depends if you're in a university or outside of a university. But they very much mean the same thing.
Okay, so anyway, there is a huge concentration of lands in Brazil in the hands of very, very few people. And it explains a lot of bad things that have always happened in Brazil. And regarding slave-like conditions, specifically, there are many studies also coming from the state saying that one of the main reasons that explain why slave-like conditions is still very common in Brazil, it's because there has never been land reform in Brazil. And of course, there have been many attempts, many different governments, many different contexts, but it has never happened, besides very specific situations, but not in a broad way, in a comprehensive approach. Anyway, And so to try to explain how it happens and how it's working. I was a labor inspector, like I said, from the Ministry of Labor. So I used to carry out these rescues. So I have been all over Brazil doing it. And it was clear, not only visually, I was live seeing the stuff happening, but also the data. The data show that many workers are submitted to slave-like conditions many times, the same workers. So as a labor inspector and as a left-wing person as well, I was very disturbed with the situation, and I was always thinking how we could do something different. And it was very obvious that the land reform was something that would have that must be done, but it's very hard to be done because of many reasons. Of course, the main thing is political, but regarding law, regarding bureaucracy, And so the idea of the Vida Pós Resgate, this program that we're talking about, came from this very specific spots where I was. And I left the labor inspection and I started to be a professor of economics. And actually, I had the idea to make a partnership between the Public Ministry of Labor. It's an institution here that's it's kind of a public attorneys regarding labor law. So they sue companies, they take the case to the courts, and they can direct these resources, these fines, And I was like, well, we could use this money to benefit workers, to make some kinds of land reform. So the main point here, Mike, is that Vida Pós Resgate, the program started trying to be in a short scale, of course, some kind of land reform. Exactly, that was the idea. That would take the money from the own corporations to facilitate, to make it feasible, the organization of workers to have the means of production, especially, but not only the lands. So what we did, we made an agreement between the Ministry of Labor and the University of Bahia, Federal University of Bahia, in which we will first make a research regarding the existing public policies that address slave-like conditions, and then try to organize and propose actually this program. So that's what we did. We made a research. We took like 4 or 5 years doing this research, and during this research, we started and we developed this program, this idea and how it would work. Of course, everybody can imagine how many variables are inside this kind of program, this kind of initiative. And we started in 2021, 2 years ago, the first two projects, I would say, 2 different cities of Brazil in this partnership. University of Bahia, Public Ministry of Labor, and we always have to make some kind of partnership with the local power, the local mayor, because many specific situations in the local areas have to be carried out by the public authorities, the municipal, the local authorities. So we got the fines from companies in the labor courts, these 2 different cities here in Bahia. And the 2 first projects started, like I said, almost 2 years ago. Now we have 5 different projects. The idea is, at some point, Max, try to make the program something that will address every situation of slave-like condition. Every rescue, we plan at some point to propose to the workers, if they are interested, if they have the background that can relate to this kind of public policy. And the idea is that at some point, it's going to be a comprehensive program, that will give the opportunities for organizing workers in rural associations in every rescue. It's not happening yet. Today we have 5 projects, but that's our plan. And the 5 projects that we are carrying out right now in this program in 5 different cities are giving us loads of clues, loads of sources, materials to think about in terms of the difficulties, in terms of the problems. I'm talking about everything, relation between the workers, bureaucracies, training. But here, Max, we're talking about training for themselves. They are being trained to work for themselves, not to work for other people. And while the program is being carries out, like I said, we are learning a lot to try to make it more comprehensive. That's the main idea. But
well, let's talk about that real quick, and because I know you're super busy and I can't keep you for much longer, but I just wanted to sort of end on that note, right? Because like you said, the concept is simple, right? Like we're gonna sue these exploitative employers in labor court. We're going to take those fines and we're going to redirect that money to help the workers who have been freed from these slave-like conditions to buy their own land, to have the tools or training that they need to cultivate that land, to produce healthier food for their local economies and themselves. Like that's a beautiful and simple concept, but making it happen is the difficult part, and we're very much in the early infant stages of that. And I just wanted to ask, like if you could say a little more about the challenges that y'all face in terms of making that program a broad reality, but also the hopeful things, the hopeful signs that you're seeing, and where you think things go from here. Like we should do another one of these episodes in like a year and talk about how it's going. But I guess, what do you see what path lies ahead? What struggles lie ahead to make this program successful in the coming months and years?
Perfect. Well, I think first I have to try to illustrate in a very superficial way how the program works, like so that you can have a more concrete idea of how it works. So, the workers we talk to the workers that were rescued to see when some rescue happens. We talk to them to see if they are interested to go back home, to work there, to live at their homelands, if they have a rural background, what they produce there, how the economy is built there, how the climate, the environment ecosystem is there, try to see if it's feasible to carry out Vida Pós Resgate as one case. So if we think that it's feasible, that we can do it, the second part of the program is to make as many meetings as possible to know better the workers and to make them know better the program, the proposal for what's going to happen. If everything goes well, we help them to organize a rural association with 2 main assumptions. There are just 2 assumptions, obligations that cannot be disobeyed in this program. They cannot use wage work. They have all to be part of the association. They cannot use wage work between them or bring somebody from outside to make someone to work as an employee. Everyone has to be at the same level. in the association. And second, they cannot use any kind of chemical products, like Monsanto and so on. We call it in Brazil poisons. We cannot use any kind of poisons. It has to be sustainable at least in an organic approach. But if it's feasible, try to go for our agroecological approach. So the idea is to be sustainable in a social point of view, a democratic way of work, and also in a environmental points of view. No use of poisons and this stuff. So the association is created, and many different things start to be done at the same time, so simultaneously. First of them, of course, is to get the money. All the money from the fines will go to the association. It's not for the individual, it's for the association. Of course, the very basic thing here is to buy a land, which is a very hard task, because most of the lands in Brazil are not legal in terms of the documents that the state consider to be necessary to make some lands legal. So it's very hard to buy a legal farm in Brazil. In the countryside, it's very, very hard. So it's one of the main complexities, difficulties of this program is to buy a land. And we have done it. Also, in many situations, mates, it's interesting. The workers or their families, they have lands, but these lands are very small, and they are not equipped. They need capital, if you wish, to be productive. So in some cases, what we're doing is to invest in equipment, facilities, machinery, everything needed in the lands of these people, these workers. So now you're beginning the exploitation, and we already had two very different situations. In one situation, we buy the lands, and we also will deliver everything that is needed for that land, that were bought in terms of seeds, machineries, facilities, whatever it's needed, fruits and so on, for the production be carried out. In other situations, we make the lands that were already owned by the workers to be productive. So we use the money to capitalize. I don't know if it's the right way to say in English, but to make these lands productive enough, so that they can use their own lands to live in a decent way. Simultaneously, so we're talking about getting the money, about get the lands or use the lands that are already from them, owned by them. And we have to prepare these workers to work for themselves. Now, Max, there's something also interesting, because I'm pretty sure in the US, there is also this ideological narrative of the entrepreneurship. Am I wrong? I'm pretty sure that same thing. It's all about you.
Oh, yeah. We got that here.
Yeah, everyone can be a boss. Everyone can be rich. It just depends of your efforts and your will. And of course, it's completely false, because of two main reasons, very basic reasons. First, you can only make your living. I'm not talking about being rich, but you can only make a living if you have the means of production, if you have the resources, the materials, to make a living. You cannot take from nowhere, this means of production. And second, what makes capitalism very productive in terms of improving, the productive forces, if you will, is that capitalism works through its functions, through collective work. It's wage work, but it's collective work. It's not a one by one. Each one works atomized, the different, and not dialoguing with each other. Exactly the contrary. The contracts can be atomized, can be individual. The formal way that corporations are organized can seem to be fragmented, but by definition, what makes capitalism productive and the labor, the workforce to improve is the production is collective by definition. By definition, the centralization of capital is just one very strong evidence of what I'm seeing, of what I'm saying. But it's very obvious that we're all talking about 300 million company economy. We're talking about, by definition, economies that are strong, where they have collective arrangements. Anyway, what's Vida Pós Resgate trying to do, Max, is to make this demagogue narrative, this ideological narrative of entrepreneurship, something real. Let's use this narrative against them and say, okay, let's promote the entrepreneurship of these workers. Let's give them lands, let's give them capital, let's give them the machines and everything they need to be entrepreneurs. That's the real idea, if you will, of the program. So parts of this challenge, if I can say this way, is to prepare them to be, in fact, indeed entrepreneurs. So, but not this individual entrepreneurship, but a collective one. Say, look, you're going to work by yourselves. You're going to work together. And it's very hard to do it, as you can imagine. You're not talking about people that came from social movements. You're talking about people that used to live and are living in very difficult situations in a very individualistic society. So it's hard to make bonds between them, for them to create bonds, to create honest links between them. Normally, they're thinking about the surviving on a daily basis. So it's hard to make them trust themselves, trust the initiative. It's hard to make them have this idea that in this way of I will go and get things done. It depends on me, because normally it doesn't depend on the person. So there's a very specific case that depends on the person. The person, the people, the workers, they have to be the protagonists of the program. The program is not going to do everything for the workers. It will facilitate. So a very hard challenge is to prepare them, to help them, to assimilate, incorporate the idea that they can do it together, that they work together, that everyone will benefit if they work together. And we try to do this in many different ways, both including meetings, trainings, courses. We try to and gather as many institutions as we can, to prepare them, to talk to them. And it's very hard. I think that it's most challenge and aspects of the program. The training, of course, also embraces, also reach the technical training. Of course, they're talking about different stuff. Sometimes, Max, and some of them are working with boats, because of many reasons regarding weather, regarding climate, regarding the economic framework of the cities. Others are producing cocoa. So it depends on the city, on the region, what they will produce. So the training depends on, of course, what's going to be produced. And of course, then we have many different variables regarding what equipment will be used, what kind of preparation, what kind of and inputs will be needed, and everything has to be addressed. Otherwise, even if everyone is very engaged, it's not gonna work. Like I said, what the program tries to do is to facilitate these organizations, these associations to produce healthy food. What's the idea here, Max? It's not only, of course, it's not only this idea of sustainability, this generic stuff that's normally used by corporations themselves. It's precisely the opposite. The idea is producing healthy foods. First of all, you can secure healthy food security so that at least they can subsist with healthy food, but also to try, and that's a very important aspect of the program. The program starts in the moment of the rescue, and it goes up to the moment of the distribution of the products. Because in Brazil, we have a national public policy that makes public schools, to buy meals for the food for the children in public schools from small producers, from rural associations. So it's so-called institutional markets. And we are linking the production of these associations to this public policy. So making contracts with the local authorities so that the schools can buy food from these associations. And it's very important, not only because the children will get healthy foods, but also because it can give some income stipend. They will not rely, on markets, open markets and so on, trying to sell their products. On the contrary, having contracts with public local authorities, they can have a regular income that can provide some. It's gonna be easier to sell even in these so-called fair trades and so on. But that's something that we're thinking ahead. Maybe it will happen, but at least these institutional markets, we are looking to get it done as soon as possible.
Hell yeah, baby. Well, building a new world out of the ashes of the old is never easy. But I hope in a year when we talk again, this program is flourishing and more people are involved in it because it's so important. And I hope that, governments around the region, around the world take notice. I hope people listen to this and are inspired by what y'all are trying to do over there. And I'm so grateful that I've learned about it, and that our incredible friend and mutual comrade, the great Vina Dubal, put us in touch so that we could talk more about this. So I just wanted to, thank you again, brother, for talking with me about this, for setting up the conversation with that folks heard in the beginning of this, and like I said, I want to stay on this. I want to check back in and hear how the program's going. And I guess to kind of round us out, any kind of final words that you had for folks listening to this about why this is important, and what you think they should be on the lookout for in the coming year.
Well, Max, I truly appreciate the opportunity, the space. I'm really looking forward to talking to you next year and tell about the failures and the success and what has gone well, what hasn't. And I'm pretty sure that it's going to be interesting. And the main point that I want to make here is that as time passes, we try to naturalize things, and one of the main things that seems to be natural in our society is the wage work organization of production. It seems that corporations are the only way that we can organize ourselves to produce our material needs. And it's not true. It's just parts of a context of humanity. And some centuries ago, it seemed impossible for society to have democratic ways of organizing ourselves. So choosing our leaders, democracy itself was for many centuries putting doubts or poisons, like it's impossible to happen. Democracy is an anarchy. We need to have a king. We need to have a spiritual leader. You need to have someone that tells us what to do. And it's part of democracy, as everybody knows. The construction of democracy was hard, and one of the main difficulties was to convince people that sharing participation in society decision was something not only possible, but something that it was good. It was something to be seeked, that everybody has to fight for this. It's important. And nowadays, I think that in many parts of the world, people agree that democracy is good. So when I start talking about democracy, it's the workplaces, because we decide about our leaders in the political arena once in 2 years, 4 years, but we spend most of our life working. Why can't we decide how the work is going to be done, how the production is going to be done in a democratic way? Everybody choosing, everybody discussing, debates, and carry out the production in a democratic way. I think that this kind of projects aims to bring this debate. It's not going to be easy. Democracy wasn't easy to be carried out. It still isn't easy, but it's the right way to go. And I think that we can, and we need to impose this idea to debates and to incorporate this idea for the workplace as well, for the production of our material needs as well. That's what we're trying to propose and to stimulate this program.
Thank you so much for watching the Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work, so please tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to the Real News Network. Solidarity forever.